Hello and welcome to season 13, episode 10 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I am Mark Bishop. Good
And
to
this
be
is,
here.
yes, it is good to be here. This is the penultimate episode of season 13. There's only one more book left in Plato's Republic, which is, of course, the book that we're reading.
And
This
the
time,
penultimate means the final one.
it doesn't. I think if you say that, you make the same bad joke, I think, every single season.
I used to
Uh,
think penultimate was the last,
that's
like
right.
the ultimate, the penultimate.
Yes, but pen is before the ultimate. This
Yeah,
is
it's like super ultimate, penultimate.
right. So something like that.
Yes.
We're, of course, discussing Book 9 of Plato's Republic this time, so finishing up the discussion of what the tyrannical character is, and then we kind of finally get around to the original question that sort of started this whole discussion, this whole book of, is the just man happier than the unjust man? And of course, Plato concludes, through Socrates, that the just man will, of course, be happier than the unjust man. And I think he makes some good arguments to that point, some that are just kind of on a practical level, some he gets into sort of the ordering of the soul and things like that. But I think, his conclusion is correct, that the just man will be happier than the unjust man, broadly speaking. What do you think of this chapter or this book?
Yeah. Good. Yeah. It was good. I mean, it reminded me again why I don't appreciate Plato like others do.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the very end, I think you know what I'm going to say.
I don't know that I do, actually.
Yes, towards the very end. Uh, oh, what is it? Yeah, he says at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
He says, but I doubt if it will ever exist on Earth. His theory of the philosopher kings.
Right.
Like he's advocating and in for this, that is the best form of government in
Mm-hmm.
his opinion, which I disagree with his opinion. But it's I guess, is this the first utilitarian, I'm sorry, utopian theory? Probably not.
I mean, as
But
far as I know, I think it's probably the only like surviving one that we have record of. I can't think of any pre-Socratic philosophers that would have set up sort of a utopian society like this, but I don't know
like
all
a
of the
theoretical
pre-Socratics.
society.
Yeah.
And and so this is like back in my youth when I was studying philosophy. I really liked the theory, but then I started really needing some practicality to it.
Hmm.
And this, of course, doesn't scratch that itch because
Right.
he's saying within the utopian thing, oh yeah, well, it never actually happened.
Right. Right.
Well, then what's the point? That just bothers me. Even theoretical physics is trying to explain the world
Right.
that exists. And, maybe wrong. It's not like something you can measure, but you're
Hmm.
trying to come up with a theory of what actually exists. And so I don't know. Yeah. So I don't
Right.
need to beat that dead horse, I
Right.
guess.
Well, let's get into to what he talks about here, because we pick up in book 9, right where we left off from book 8, right? Last time we
Yeah.
talked about, he set up, what is
That
the,
usually happens. It comes right after the other one, and so it kind of takes up where it left off.
well, you know what I mean. It's like following exactly in sort of the same topic, because we had last time, right? What does the democratic society look like? What is sort of the corresponding individual character of that person? Did that for oligarchy and for this ideal society as well. Last time he set up, well, what does the tyrannical society look like? And he sort of describes, how it would come into existence. Essentially, sort of this band of robbers, almost, right? You have this
Yeah.
demagogue who sort of leads this group of people, and it's all just centered around the tyrant's will. So he
Yes.
turns, well, what does that look like in the individual, right? Because we're comparing the society to the individual. What can we learn about the individual from the society? And really, what he says is that the tyrant and the individual is this criminal type that we've been talking about, right? In the individual character, right? He does not have any of his desires in order. Right, he's just pursuing whatever he wants next and sort of willing to do whatever it takes to get there. Right, it's purely the desires, the passions that are in control of his character, of in control of who he is.
Yeah,
Um,
and he does make a some pretty pretty good observations of that type of mindset, and he
mhm,
calls it like a criminal mindset.
right.
And they even talk about burglars and thieves and the people that are they're so selfish, self-absorbed, and governed by their passions. They just will take whatever they can from
Hmm.
others, and that is so true. of a certain percentage of people that you'll never be able to. Um, I used to think, in my own little utopian thought, I used to be able to think there should be a way to basically eliminate serious crime
Hmm.
from a society. I don't know that I don't know that it's even possible. I think you can certainly suppress it. But you know, he talks about there's a certain people that will choose to just you know follow their passions and they don't care about others and they just
Right.
take what they want. Yes.
Right. Yeah, I like this passage too on page 310 for us. It's section 572E or 573A. He says, suppose further that the same thing happens to the son as to the father, right? Talking about, how this sort of tyrannical character develops. He says he's drawn towards complete license, which is tempters call complete liberty, right? So confusing, what is sort of freedom versus just the passions. His father and family support moderation as tempters come in on the other side. And when the wicked wizards who want to make him a tyrant despair of keeping their hold on the young man by other means, they contrive to implant a master passion in him to control the idle desires that divide his time between them, like a great winged drone, unless you can think of a better description for such a passion. He goes on and he says, essentially, that the tyrant, this tyrannical character, it's not just that he has a bunch of disordered passions and he can't really figure out which, was the right sort of course, which is true, right? He's very confused, right? He's just pursuing all these different things. But the tyrant, right, most strictly speaking, is the one who's sort of governed by this one passion above all else, and that's like all he can think of, and that's how he, stays as this person in power and things like that, because everything is just sort of centered on this one pursuit. And he mentions like specifically like sex and things like that, or alcohol. And you kind of see this, I think, in some people who are so deep down in this, one path of life that's all they can think about is when can I get the next, dose of whatever it is that I'm just sort of trapped by. So you're sort of enslaved to that passion. That's all you can think about. That's all you live for is for that next, singular passion.
And he does a good job, like you said, of explaining how the people around that person
Hmm.
quite often help corrupt them, you know,
Right.
and having good friends is so important in life. You know,
Hmm.
having surrounding yourself with good people, people that you admire, even if they're kind of knuckleheads like you. You know, you want. I've always. I don't know if I probably did, but maybe one in one ear out the other. But I always wanted you and your brothers to have friends that were willing to say, like, if you said, you know, hey, hold my beer, watch this, you know, that there's a limiting to that. Like,
Hmm.
if you're really going to put yourself in danger, they'd be like, nope. You
Yeah.
know, like, you need friends that'll be like, if you're just going to like, you know, grab onto the tire swing and swing into the lake, oh yeah, you know, do a flipper, you know, maybe a little dangerous, but you know, if it's like I'm going to jump over this speeding car, you know, like, nope. You know, the friends, and I've had you know various friends over the years, and some of them would be like they would just laugh if you put
Hmm.
yourself in danger. They would have been amused by and not care if I hurt myself or others. Those are not friends. You know just let you get into your passions or whatever which is you know self-destructive or destructive of others and so I think he makes a good point about this and he also mentions like a true tyrant you know later in this same book that they're unhappy because the
Hmm.
people they're always fearful of the people around them and that is really true like if you read you know as you know I like to read historical biographies um you know, like great historical figures or bad people. I'm fascinated by how people rose to power,
Hmm.
and there's kind of common themes, you know, like especially when they first get power, and that they have to consolidate it, and then to maintain power, like whether it's Lenin or Stalin or Mao or any of these terrible tyrants, they live in constant anxiety that someone will do to them what they did to the others.
Right.
You know they have to have more and more power and more control, and they're miserable. You
Right.
know they can't sleep. They have to dose themselves with sleep aids because they don't sleep. They're unhappy, and they try to and do all sorts of things to try to bring happiness to that life. So Plato's right. I think
Yeah.
you think, oh, they could have everything they want, but except for peace,
Right.
you know, or happiness.
Yeah. Yeah, because I like what he says. This is page 313 for us, around section 576A. But he's saying, essentially, talking about, how this tyrant develops, right? Either this very rich person, this just very powerful person, somebody who captures sort of the people around him, right? And others notice
Mhm.
that. He says, their companions are parasites in every way subservient to them, and they are themselves always prepared to give way and put on the most extravagant act of friendship if it suits their purpose. But once that
Yes.
purpose is achieved, their tune changes, right? So you get these hangers on, around these powerful people, right? They know what sort of desires and passions are driving you. They're going to do whatever it takes to sort of keep you happy so long as it serves them, right? So long as they can use this tyrant in pursuit of their own interests. And that's just going to be the people that this tyrant is surrounded by. There'll be no true companions. Nobody actually wants the best for this person. They're just in it for themselves to gain power from this tyrant.
Yeah, and it's transactional. So it's got to be horrible, its
Yeah.
own way. People what do they say? Be careful what you wish for.
Hmm.
Uh, there was it an old Twilight Zone episode where a person it was like it had three wishes or something, and every time it was kind of, or maybe it was like Satan was granting a wish or something, and I'm maybe misremembering the whole thing, but the final wish was, I want to be the most powerful man in the world.
Hmm.
And so then he covers his eyes, and as he pulls his hands away from his face, he raises his head up, and he's Hitler, but he is in the bunker at the
Hmm.
end.
Hmm.
It was just like, well, you were the most powerful man in the world for a period of time, but
Right.
now, yeah, and they're like, they're discussing committing suicide.
Yeah.
So it's like, be careful what you wish for. You have to work for these things, and being a tyrant isn't. And Plato points out, it's not all. It's not the bee's knees.
Yeah.
Not all wine and roses.
Right. Yeah. And then he moves on to, well, how do we rank these? How do we know that, the tyrant really is more unhappy than the sort of philosopher king or just the philosopher in general, right? The person who has his sort of reason guiding over everything else, and the person who's just a slave to the passions. And sort of the first and sort of strongest argument he puts forward is on page 316, 577D. He says, well, then, I said, if the individual is analogous to the state, he must be similarly placed. His mind will be burdened with servile restrictions because the best elements in him will be enslaved and controlled, and completely controlled by a minority of the lowest and most lunatic impulses. He says that's slavery, right? That's not real freedom, right? Talking about
Yeah.
confusing liberty and license. And he says, and is not the state enslaved to a tyrant least able to do as it wishes, right? All the people who are, under the tyrant have the least amount of freedom, right? Same thing with just the person himself, right? If you are this tyrant character who is just a slave to the passions, you can't actually do anything you want because you're only ever pursuing this one thing for the rest of your life, and that's all you can think about, and it's not actually freedom and uh, anything really.
Yeah, I thought that argument was a little overstated. I didn't
Hmm.
find that the most compelling. I liked his more comparative analysis of the philosopher king,
Hmm.
and that person being able to enjoy many different things, which is really
Right.
kind of the same, opposite
Right.
coin of what you just described. But I felt that was a little bit more compelling. That, like, okay, if you're a person that can moderate your impulses, and you have the wisdom to appreciate beauty and art,
Hmm.
and be a leader, and be a servant of others, there's a really strong argument that you will have true happiness in this
Right.
life, if you can achieve all those things, and you have a certain balance, and you're not doing it just for everybody's praise. So it's not contingent upon the praise of others. You're just doing it for all the right reasons.
Hmm.
He makes a really good argument, I thought,
Right.
that
Yeah.
relative to the tyrant, or relative to these other positions, that ability to be the philosopher king, or the ultimate guardian, is the most happy.
Hmm.
Which was the original question that was asked of him at the beginning of the book. The
Right.
book,
Yeah.
the first part of the book.
Yeah, so his first argument is that argument about, essentially the tyrant is slave to his passions, right? He's not actually free, can't do anything he wants. And then the second argument, like you mentioned, is that positive argument for the philosopher, right? And he says, I think this is particularly descriptive, page 321, around section 582A. He says, when therefore there is dispute about the three types of pleasure, right? Talking about knowledge and about the will and about the passions, and they are being compared simply on the grounds of the amount of pleasure they give and without any reference to how admirable or how good or bad they are, How are we to know what is the truth, right? He says essentially that the greatest experience of all three types of pleasure is the gain lover's knowledge of the truth, such that you would rank his experience of the pleasures of knowledge above the philosopher's experience of the pleasures of gain. But he says, yeah, knowledge is this highest pursuit, right? You get more, it is more lasting, it is more eternal, right? These pleasures, these passions are fleeting, right? Power is also fleeting, right? Knowledge in pursuing the thing that is sort of the most eternal and the most true will benefit you the most. Right. In some ways, it's kind of a little bit of a utilitarian, like the most pleasure you will get from knowledge in some ways, but it's based on like the eternity of knowledge and the eternity of truth, right? What you're desiring rests in something that is more than just the fleeting things sort of the world.
Yes. Well, and I mean that the question is a utilitarian question.
Hmm.
I mean that's really they're arguing over not over the theory, which one's a better person. Their initial argument was in a utilitarian sense, who's happier? And so
Hmm.
so I think he does a really admirable job articulating that the person who is not just out for selfish gain 100%, even if he attains all the selfish gain and power, is not the happier person
Hmm.
of the people that he describes. Don't you think?
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. And that's kind of what he says in the third argument, right? In sort of support of what makes, sort of the pursuit of pleasure the most real and things like that. He says, well, the other sort of pursuits, either the pursuits of the desires or the pursuits of power and things like that, they are sort of mixed with pain, right? Whatever pleasure they have has to be mixed with pain because it's not the fullest of the things, right? If we set up this order where we recognize knowledge as the highest thing and it's in its pursuit, when the other things aren't going to have the same level of goodness as this pursuit of knowledge, they're going to be mixed with some bad. Right? And he sets it up. He's like a description of like colors, right? Where it's like, well, if white is sort of the highest thing, right, and black is the lowest thing, right? Well, the only like truly purely white thing is this knowledge. Everything else will be sort of shades of gray, right? Because if you're just pursuing the pleasures of meat and drink and food and things like that, right? Because those are fleeting, right? Because those involve hunger in some way, right? That's a pain that you experience in them. Right? It's whatever pleasure you get from those things will inevitably be mixed with pain. And so knowledge, the pleasure of knowledge, is the only one that's like truly complete, that is truly real, and is beyond sort of any fleetingness and any sort of mixture with pain.
I'm looking up. I'm listening to you.
Yes.
There was a song that espouses Plato's argument here,
Hmm.
and it's by Rob Bass called "Joy and Pain." I
Oh,
was just
good.
listening to it yesterday when I was on the treadmill.
Huh.
So if anybody really wants to know more about Plato's philosophy of the balancing of the pleasure and pain, you can listen to Rob Bass,
Hmm.
Joy. N. It's an N apostrophe. Mean.
Hmm. That's
Great,
great.
great modern philosopher Rob Bass. Also, his better song is "It Takes Two,"
Hmm. Yeah.
which is an ode to heterosexuality, I think, in its own
I
way.
guess. I don't know. Maybe.
Do you want me
Uh,
to sing a verse? You,
no,
you,
I know the song.
you know the song.
I
Okay.
know the song. I don't think that's
Okay.
necessary.
All right. We might
If
have lost.
anybody's
If I started singing, we would have lost two listeners. Actually, that's not true. They're right now, they're listening and they're like, oh, sing it already.
I
That's what
don't
they
think that's
I
true.
think I think it's true. I think they really would enjoy it.
Right. To kind of just summarize Plato's third argument here, this is page 328, right? He says, section 587a, and a little bit before that, and he says,
Yes.
and if the mind as a whole will follow the lead of its philosophic element without internal division, each element will be just and in all other respects perform its own function, and in addition will enjoy its own particular pleasures, which are the best and truest available to it. But when either of the other two elements is in control, it cannot achieve its own proper pleasure and compels the other two to pursue a false pleasure that is not their own, right?
Mm,
Talking about like if you have this sort of disordered soul, right? If you're just sort of trying to achieve power all the time, right? And that's just sort of your goal rather than knowledge. Well, then you're going to
right.
be kind of subserving, right? Your sort of intellectual capabilities, your reasonable capabilities, just in pursuit of power, and that's not the object of knowledge, or that's not the object of reason, right? So you're
Mhm.
pursuing something less, right? If at any point in time, right, you're sort of rearranging the order of those things, then you're not pursuing the fullness of pleasure and of truth and of goodness, et cetera, all of those things that are sort of combined in there, right? It just becomes false. It becomes not real because it's not going towards its intended purpose.
Yes, good summary.
Thank you. Um,
And then he has a brief explanation of that a tyrant is exactly 729 times more
right.
unhappy than the philosopher king, which I was like, oh, okay. But having said that, like I know it was a big thing in the Greek world at the time to have like the numerology, I
hmm
guess, or whatever you could get a term is for it, like having meaning from numbers. But like I was actually in church this weekend, and my mind drifted at some point. And whenever you're in a beautiful building, there is like what do you call that? Equal things on either side. What's the word I'm trying to think of? Where things are
There's
uh,
an equality. There's symmetry.
symmetry. Thank you.
Symmetry. Okay.
Obviously, that's the word I was looking
hmm
for. Thank you. No, like the symmetry and like
hmm
certain religious buildings will have like 12 windows or that type of thing that have that are reflective of the 12 tribes and the apostles and that kind of stuff.
hmm
So maybe there's something to some aspects of numerology or
Oh
the
yeah.
significance of
Yeah, there
numbers.
there are symbolic numbers for sure. I mean, you
Yeah,
see that throughout
right.
all of the Bible. This isn't really related to the book, but I figured you'd appreciate this story since it's
Right?
relating to church in this past weekend. And hopefully our listeners enjoy it as well. So Saturday, the bishop was in town for adult confirmation,
Well,
which was
wait a
great.
second. You're talking about you or somebody else? Because the bishop was always in town.
Yeah, that's great.
Ew.
But yeah, I help run like the OCIA and adult confirmation program, here at the church, and so we had 10 people from our parish getting confirmed, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
So it wasn't at our home parish, it was another church in Gainesville that I guess I won't name. But there were people from all across the diocese who were coming in because it's the adult
Yeah.
confirmation session. The bishop's in town. And it's a very modern looking church. It's kind of like on a diagonal. It's sort of weirdly laid out. We get in there, it's packed because everybody's family's in town. The bishop's here and it's at their usual like 5 p.m. Saturday night mass. So like the regular crowd is there and all these people in town for confirmation. And
Yeah.
we're sitting there, waiting for everything to begin. And this woman stands up on this pedestal in front of the congregation, like in front of like if you kind of split the church in half, she's like directly in front of half of the people and sort of the
Okay.
choirs sort of behind her. And she stands up and she says, the most important part of the Mass, what gives the Mass its richness, is everyone joining and singing together and praying together, which is not what gives the Mass its richness. It's, the sacrament of the Eucharist, the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And she says, in honor of it being MLK weekend,
Oh no.
we are going to center ourselves in a prelude and sing a song called like "We Will March in the Light of God." And
Okay.
it's that phrase repeated over and over. And she says, and then at one point, we switched to the Zulu lyrics, the Zulu language of Africa, because I guess MLK was black. It's just racist because, he had
Yes.
nothing to do with the Zulu language.
Right.
And just because, he was black, that he needs to be equated with
Wow.
the Zulu language. And so she does not turn towards the choir. And they had like a couple instrumentalists as well. She spends the mass leading the congregation up on this pedestal. She's standing like
Wow.
in front of the bishop, essentially. She's not on the sanctuary, but she's like immediately in front of it. She's blocking like the bishop and the priests for like half of the congregation. She's standing up there. She's lifting her arms and like joining everybody in song.
Wow.
And that continued throughout the entire mass.
Wow.
And it was rough. They also processed in. They had their extraordinary ministers who were all women. I don't know why they needed extraordinary ministers because there's a bishop and two priests and a deacon. So I don't
Yeah.
know why they needed any extra people, but they have them process in. I guess that's what they do at every mass. They process
Wow.
in as if they're like part of the clerics for mass. And there's a whole argument about why you shouldn't really have extraordinary ministers ordinarily because they're extraordinary ministers, but they had them like as part of the procession.
Interesting.
So it was a wild experience. Very, very great that all those people were confirmed and run into the
Yes.
church, but it was an interesting mass.
Well, I'm gonna. You know what? I have noticed in our vicarate, I
Hmm.
guess in our area. I don't know when the change happened, but I don't know if you noticed when you're in town. The extraordinary ministers used to come up onto the altar
Hmm.
itself for the final, it'd be a consecration, or like the final procedure or whatever you want to call it. I'm not. I should know more
Hmm.
about the liturgy. And before the distribution of the Eucharist, and now there's been a couple months. They are off the side
Yeah.
waiting until the prayers and that part of the Mass are completed.
Hmm.
And then they come up and then they receive the Eucharist from the
Right.
deacon and the
Which,
priest,
yeah,
which
that's.
which is more appropriate,
Mhm.
right? Because otherwise they were up there on the altar, while that was happening, and it never really struck me as odd before because I don't really pay attention to that kind of stuff as
Hmm.
much. I do more now, but yeah, I might have had a hard time with some lady up on a pedestal,
Yeah. It
and
was rough.
I'm kind of surprised somebody didn't go up. Yeah, you lady, get off that stupid
Yeah.
box.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
if you, this isn't meant to just be a rant about Eucharistic ministers and things like that, but even in like the guidelines, it was only under John Paul II that these became a thing. Like these are a very modern thing in the church.
right,
You don't have
right,
these, especially, pre-Vatican II. And it's expressly forbidden, well, for them to be up on the sanctuary. It's actually in like the instructions for them to receive the Eucharist as everybody else. So
correct,
they shouldn't
right,
be up on the sanctuary at all. Also, it's
right.
expressly forbidden for them to become a regular part of the Mass. They're to be
Yes,
used in extraordinary circumstances. That's what their name means, when there
yeah.
physically is a serious impediment to the priest distributing the Eucharist. And it's listed in these guidelines for extraordinary ministers that just taking extra time does not count as an extraordinary circumstance.
Hmm.
So just because it's, I guess, more convenient and less time consuming, we've just made them a regular thing. And they receive up on the sanctuary, and in some places they process in with the priests and the bishops into the
Wow.
beginning of Mass. Yeah.
Well, part of me, the impatient part, kind of likes that they help out, but I'm like, at some point, I'm like, why do you need to come back in the pew? You
Right.
know,
Right.
why are you sitting next to me instead of up there?
Right.
What
Yeah.
makes you so special?
Right. I mean, yeah.
I've never had an interest in doing that,
Yeah.
mainly because, quite frankly, I don't feel worthy.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why I've never been a lector.
Hmm.
Lector, yes.
Yeah.
Just because I just feel like I don't know. I feel like somebody would be better suited.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we don't have to worry about that for our wedding mass,
Well, that's
because we don't need lectors, we don't need extraordinary ministers, because it's all
yeah,
just the priest.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it also keeps those ladies off the altar. That's oh, now we really lost the two of them, you listeners. Um, yeah, I used to be. I think I mentioned this before. I used to be in favor of women priests.
Really?
Yeah, like my youth, I
Yeah.
didn't care. Like, why can't they be priests? And now
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, hmm. And what's really, and it doesn't make, I don't have a logical argument. Well, I do have a logical argument, but
Hmm.
I don't really, I don't espouse the logical argument.
Hmm.
It's the ick feeling I get when I see these Anglican women priests and their rainbow vestments,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, nope,
Hmm.
nope, I'm not signing up for that. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know what that is, but I'm out. Peace out.
Yeah.
They have the Archbishop of Canterbury is a
Yeah.
woman now,
Yeah.
which good for her. Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, to return to the book, that wasn't meant to be. Well, I
Yes.
guess it was meant to be a whole rant on the liturgy and things like that. But yeah, he essentially concludes like what we've already talked about.
What's wrong
Uh,
with your bishop down there? I mean, doesn't
he's
he?
he's actually a pretty good bishop, and he's been supportive of like traditional Latin mass stuff, it
Yeah.
seems. So I don't know at what point like
Maybe he didn't know it was going to happen and didn't want to make a scene.
That's what I'm thinking.
And he's
I
like, "Hey, get
was,
this lady off this podium.
yeah,
I don't care. You can do your kumbaya crap down the
right.
street."
I was mentioning that to some friends. I'm like, I'm half expecting, the pastor of that parish to get a letter in the mail sometime soon, being like, "Hey, what was that?" Because that should just not be
Yeah.
occurring. It seems.
Time for a reassignment.
Yeah, yeah.
Time for that guy
Um,
to go to on retreat for 9 months and get some young priest in there.
yeah,
The
yeah.
young guys are pretty kick ass.
Oh yeah,
The guys are coming out now. They're no nonsense, but they're better. Like they're
hmm
not jerks about it.
yeah. And
Do you
you,
get the feeling from
yeah.
like from the 30-ish and younger
hmm
crowd coming into the parishes? They're more businesslike and they're kind and they're really articulate, but they're firm about stuff.
Right.
It's like I don't know what they're doing. They're doing something right with these
Right.
guys.
Yeah,
It's like,
it's you see that even in like polling, and it's hard to like judge based on these polls because oftentimes they use like percent like conservative and liberal by age group
yeah,
and seminaries and things like that, and those things don't quite map up. Usually, it's like opinions on the traditional liturgy and things like that is how they make those determinations. But it's overwhelmingly all of sort of the quote unquote like liberal influences in the church are in the like boomers and up.
yeah,
All of the seminarians who are coming out, it's like 80% like in the quote unquote conservative category, like based on whatever
yeah.
factors these studies are using. It's like they are much more serious about the traditional liturgy and Eucharistic devotion and things like that, it seems, than the older generations of priests.
But I'm not getting in like any sort of hostility either. Like
Yeah.
like I wouldn't be opposed to the hostility, to certain, but they still have like the Catholic social teaching going on,
hmm
which is purposely left leaning, from the archdiocese
Yeah.
and higher up. I get that, I'm not condoning all that, but like I think the younger priests are doing a really good job of balancing all that. They're not alienating anybody, but they're being pretty firm about, hey, let's try to keep it focused somewhere it should be focused. But anyway,
Right.
let's
Exactly.
back to the end of this chapter and we can get on. And
Right.
I'm missing the college championship game, by the
Yeah,
way.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, it kind of relates to what we were talking about. Just to quote from page 333, which is section 590D, he says, right, he thoughts, countering Thrasymachus, which is how we started this. He says, to ensure that people of this type, right, sort of the common people or whatever, are under the same authority as the highest type, we have said that they should be subjected to that highest type, which is governed by its divine element. But this control is not exercised, as Thrasymachus thought, to the detriment of the subject, but because it is better for every creature to be under the control of divine wisdom. That wisdom and control should, if possible, come from within. Failing that, it must be imposed from without, in order that, being under the same guidance, we may all be friends and equals. So
Mhm.
whether or not you agree with his, imposing, the divine wisdom and things like that on people, which, would probably never work in such like a strict totalitarian way that he kind of presents, I think it is true. What he's saying, especially about the individual, right? Looking at the order of the soul, and that's kind of the argument he makes, right? That it is better for everybody that reason be in charge, right? It's not just, theoretically good to pursue knowledge. He said, no, you like get definite benefits from pursuing the good. You should pursue good. You should pursue justice. That will make you a better, happier, more fulfilled person than if you're pursuing injustice, right? Even if you think you get, material gains, like Thrasymachus thought, from pursuing injustice, right? And that's really where true happiness is. He says, no, that's not the case. It's just not true happiness. And that's essentially his argument, is that's how you find happiness. That's how you find justice, is in the ordering sort of the soul, pursuing knowledge above all things. And you can kind of equate that, right? Where he uses sort of the divine knowledge in these forms, right? We think about that more as like God, where he's talking about the ideals and pursuing the eternal things. We would say, pursuing God is sort of the highest thing you can do, and all of your sort of desires should be oriented to that. And that's what he says, and that is where true happiness would lie.
Good summary.
Thank you. Do you have any other final points? Because I think that brings us to the end. I know he mentions at the end, he says, "Oh, it'll probably never happen," which is frustrating for like an actual political philosophy. But I think that's about where he ends things.
True.
Yes.
Yeah, I said that at the beginning.
Yeah.
I don't need to berate it again.
All right. Well, if you don't have any other thoughts, this has been
Nope.
season 13, episode 10 of Unlimited Opinions. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions. I have been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.